We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos and Chelek Tes Zayin, the third Sicha for the Parshas Shemos. This is a Rashi Sicha, and Rashi addresses that it says in the pasuk with regards to Moshe, Vayigdal Moshe, and in very pashtus, as you read the Rashi, Rashi's question is, it says already in the pasuk before Vayigdal Moshe, what is it again, Vayigdal Moshe? Rashi says that the first one was he became tall, the height, and the second one he became big because he was appointed in Paro's house. So it seems like the question is, why do we have a second time by Yigdal when it already says first by Yigdal? But the Rebbe explains Punkt Fakert, that Rashi is really trying to explain why is there the first by Yigdal? What's the meaning in the first by Yigdal? Not what the question is in the second Yigdal. Very interesting how the Rebbe turns it around to mean just the opposite. The Rebbe proves in the Lashon Rashi that there are several difficulties to understand the Rashi when we learn it Pashtus, as it seems on the surface, and the Rebbe is going to prove various problems are answered if we learn it the correct way, that Rashi's issue is something different than the duplicate language, but Rashi's real problem is, what does it mean by Yigdal the first time, as we'll see inside. And there's also a Yena Shel Torah at length also brings in from his father's Hagos and from the Zohar, as we will see inside. Let's go step by step. From Pasuk Aleph, from Pasuk Vayhi Bayomim Hahem, it says, the Pasuk talks about that it was in those days before Moshe Rabbeinu took a stand with the Mitzri, after he was taken into Chaved, nursed him at first, and then when he grew up, she brings him back to Baspare, and he was in Baspare's house. Then the pasuk says, "Vayi bayomim hahem," and it was during those days. Vayigdal Moshe vayetze gomer. So Moshe grows up, and he goes up to his brothers, and then he sees that a Mitzri was beating up on a Jew. Vayachas a Mitzri gomer. So he smit the Mitzri. Is Rashi mighty the Vector? Rashi quotes from the pasuk the words "Vayigdal Moshe" and is mefarish. Rashi explains "Vayigdal Moshe." V'aloi kvar kisiv Vayigdal Hayeled. But is it then not already written that the child has grown up? In the previous pasuk it says Vayigdal Hayeled Bativiehu El Baspare. The child grew up, and she brought him to Baspare. So, since it's already says, why is the pasuk saying again, "Vayi bayomim hahem vayigdal Moshe"? Amar Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Lo. So Rashi quotes the author, the name of this comment, this interpretation. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Lo. He said, "Arishoin lekoimo." The first one, when it says that she brought him into the Baspare Vayigdal Hayeled, meaning that he became tall. The height, it was godly, became tall. Basheni, and the second one, in our pasuk, when it says Vayi Bayom Mahim Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grew old, it's talking L'Gedula. He became to greatness. He became big. He became a leader in what way? Sheminuho Pare Al Beiseh. Pare appointed him over his home. That was his gedula. He became great because he was appointed over the house of Pare. Learning the Pashtus, when you learn this Rashi simply, is by Rashi Kosher. What is Rashi's difficulty? The Zelbe Kasha be in Medrash. Rashi has the same question as the Medrash does. A station freer in Pasuk by Moshe and by Yigdal HaYelad. It already states before in the Pasuk, in the previous Pasuk, that with regards to the Moshe, the Yelad became big by Yigdal, and she brings it to Parah. So why does the Torah say again Moshe became big a second time? So that's the problem that Rashi has as the Medrash has. If them entered Rashi, and that's what Rashi's response is. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Chulu, Rabbi Yehuda says, Harishan lekoima, Vashem legdula Chulu. The first one means the height, and the second one means for greatness. Their pirush is aber lechayda in ganzen nit verstanden. This is not totally not understood if we should try to say that this is what's Rashi's problem and Rashi's answer. The freer dike posik vayigdal hayeled chulu. The previous posik, the child grew old. State baldu behemshach noch the werte. It says immediately and as a follow up to the words vatikacha isha hayeled vatinikeyu. Says first that Miriam suggested to give it to Yocheved, and the woman Yocheved took the Yeled, took Moshe, and she nursed him, Vatinikeyu. But the fun is verstandig bepashtus, so from that, it logically understood simply as do retzich wegen vayigdal, that we're talking about he grew old, be'erech dem zman fun Vatinikeyu. She nursed him, and he got big relative to this time that she nursed him. Bis Chov Dalet Chodesh, the nursing takes place up to 24 months. He become big, he no longer nursed. As the noch is by Yigdal HaYeled, she finished nursing, so the Yeled grew big. Und the Far, und darf man nicht ankommen zu Yunike, does not need any more nursing. Und the Far, and since there was no more reason for Yocheved to hold on to him, but so she brings him to Paro's daughter. That we would learn meanings by Yigdal Moshe. That would be the Vayigdal Moshe, the previous pasuk. Aber Vayigdal Moshe in them pasuk, but in our pasuk, that wegen Agidl was bringing to a Meglichkeit from Vayachas HaMitzri. That talks about a growth that allows for the possibility to smite the Mitzri. The pasuk says he became big and he smite the Mitzri. Can't be at 24, 25 months old, which means I feel better because about a much later time. I feel know them even after being for a lengthy time at Paris home, after brought back, he became Vayigdal. So what is the Vayigdal difficult over here? So these are two separate Vayigdals. Without Rashi's commentary, it almost seems like the first Vayigdal means he grew old, no longer nursed. And the second Vayigdal, he became big enough to go ahead and beat up the Mitzvah. This might the Mitzvah. So what is the... So this all will point that there's something else that is really bothering Rashi over here in this Vayigdal, not just why is there a duplicate Lashon. Base. So that's a general question. What is the problem that Rashi has? Then we have to look in the Pirush Rashi Gufa Daf Mefarstein. We have to understand in the Rashi itself. So the first thing that everyone wants to know is usually Rashi gives you the commentary without telling you what the question was. So instead of starting off Aloy Kfar Nemar Vayigdal HaYeled, should have just told you Harishan Lekayma, Harishan Lekayma, Vasheni Legdula. Why does he have to first introduce the question? Something is showing you that there's something more here. Aleph. The derech for Rashi b'pirushi is the Rashi's style In his commentary, is Vigeret Filmol has spoken many times, needs to oistaichen freer the Schwerigkeit in Posuk, not to first interpret what's difficult in the Posuk, in other words, the challenge, the problem that he has. And then Rashi answers, and then he answers, that's not Rashi's style. But at his Baal Mevayer in the Posuk, he immediately explains the Posuk. Bederech Memela, Bert verantwortet the Shaila in Posuk. And then the question is automatically answered in the Pasuk. So the question is, why does Rashi start with the question? It already states that the child grew big. It shows that there's something more over here, that Rashi wants to emphasize the Ksiv Vayigdal Hayeled, not just as a duplicate base. Klal, what's the answer? Why is Lekoima? Koima is height. The Rashi says the first time means the height. Why is height? How does height come? How does height come in as the meaning of the first Vayigdal? Base. We passed on the Loshen Harishin Lekoima. How does it fit? Rashi saying the first one was for height. Usually, when you finish nursing, if we say that Vayigdal after Vatinikeu Vayigdal, you're finished nursing, you don't grow up so much in height. This generally, why are we emphasizing over here the level of height? I mean, the Rebbe will explain all this because the two Vayigdals seem to be around the same time, and how would it says Bayom Mahem, the Rebbe will see, and therefore the question is really Rashi's trying to tell you that there was more than just after the 24 months, as we'll see later on. But right now, the question is, how does it fit the language, the Koimot height? From the time that a child is weaned from nursing, kommt ihm zu in der Hispatchus von seiner Chitzonis geworden. So it added to him the development of his external limbs. As kommt zu Vog und Mos, he adds weight and measure. As zwinkelt sich sein Hushadibur Asechel, he develops his speech, his intellect, and similar. What is the emphasis? Rashi says, somehow that he became taller. Why are we stressing that aspect after he became weaned? So, came taller, okay, but it's part of the general development. Gimel, from Vanen, number 3, from Vanen is the Hechrech. In Pshutish Mikra from the Posik, it says, what happened the second time? We say he made him into an important person. Where does that say in the Posik? Where is the force, the evidence? In Pshutish Mikra from the Posik, in our verse, it says, as the Gadlus from Kashiva, Sumoish is Beshtanen, that his greatness was important. Rashi says he became important. That is the second time that he. Rashi says, how did he become important? That he appointed him over his house. How do we have evidence for that? And especially when you read the flow of the pasuk, it seems that he became an adult, or he became big, so that he can go ahead and fight the mitzvah. His mashmas is given a gadol b'shaychus sechov, that he went out to his brothers to see their suffering, how the Egyptians were dominating them and causing them hardship. So he became big enough to go out to his brothers. His mashmas is given a gadol, it appears that it was a greatness as it relates to his brother, to the Eden. As the Medrash says, so he got old enough, was that he went out to his brothers to see that it fits in the flow of the pasuk. Rashi chooses to say that he pointed him a leader over his home. Why does Rashi say that? Number 4, the Baal Ditmiya from Rashi is mitzadem kefil for Vayigdal. Since we're learning now that Rashi's wonder, Rashi's problem is, why does it say a duplicate Vayigdal? So why does he quote from the pasuk? Also, Moshe got brick, not just Vayigdal. And hey, the Rebbe says, "Kivaduber kama pa'amim," as we had spoken many times. Bring Rashi the nomen from Baal Hamaimer. Rashi only will bring the author who said that statement. In this case, Shimon ben Eloi. Rashi only Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi. Rashi only brings down the name of the statement, Kedei de mitfar entfern, in order to answer with that name, or the mach glatter, or perhaps just to make it smoother. Akashi was vetnis oider batal mit memulach. A question that arises by a sharp student, and he gives him sort of a hint and gives that first challenge, saying, well, this statement was said by Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Law. Darf man verstehen, was wird da verantwortet durch der Yediyah? So what is it that is being answered through knowing Ados of Gizok Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Law, that this was said by Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Law? So to recap, first the Rebbe wants to know why is a interpretation necessary at all? Seems very poshut. The first time he grew up, he was weaned. Second time he grew up, so he can go fight for his brother. Rashi doesn't need a commentary at all. And then the Rebbe presents 5 questions. How Rashi brings, in this Rashi brings first the question and doesn't write the way he's come to the answer, Rishon Lekoima and Shem Ligdul, as he usually does. Why does Rashi choose to say Lekoima, to height? Seems like child when he turns 24 months, weaned. A lot of things happen then. Why does Rashi emphasize the Lekoima? How do we know that he appointed him? In our pasuk means that he appointed him for on his home. Maybe it means so that he can go out to his brother. Why does Rashi quote to the pasuk also the word Moshe? And what's the purpose of Rashi bringing the name Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Law, the author of this statement? Rebbe explains now a possible answer. In what Rashi means, and what Rashi's problem over here is, and what Rashi's trying to say over here. That basically saying, the pasuk says another thing, and it just seems like, what is all of a sudden the pasuk telling you he became big? Because there's no frame of reference when this began. The first Vayigdal is after 24 months, it finished nursing, he became big. But here it says Vahi Vayom Mahem Vayigdal Moshe, that there's no reference to what did he become big. So Rashi is basically trying to say this is not a big in time, but it's a big in concept that he was appointed. L'chayre Gimel, l'chayre vot men gekent zogen, l'chayre you could say, as Rashi will do bavonen, Rashi is trying to tell you another meaning in the word Vayigdal. As the Vayigdal in unser Pasuk, the Vayigdal in our verse may need themselves suk from Gidul. It does not mean the same category of growth in Zman. Doesn't mean he grew up, that there's more time passed, as it says Tzugikum and Noch Asach Yoren, that he increased many years. Rashi wants to tell you that's not here. Vayigdal is not a growth, a time, that time passed as the first Vayigdal. Over here, it doesn't mean the same thing. Why can't we say these times passed? Because there's no reference over here of anything that happened that would mean that he was become big. Because it's difficult to say, as the pasuk Zogam Vayigdal Stam, the pasuk is just saying, and he grew. Und der mit meinen Ahisofe von a gewissen Zman. And the Torah really means there was additional time. Nicht ausdeutschendig dabei, wie viel Zman das is, without interpreting or giving you clearly translate what the time we're talking about. So Rashi wants to tell you here, Gedula doesn't mean time, but a Gadlus in Chashivas would mean a greatness and importance, like Gedula Chul. So it's not the duplicate Lashon of Vayigdal, as we learned before, but it's the change in the meaning of Vayigdal that it means in greatness. But in the Lashon Rashi doesn't fit, because doesn't it masfi, that would not be sufficient to answer this Rashi. Because Aleph, Avozok Rashi, why does Rashi say? Rashi himself says, but it already states that the child grew big. But that's not really what Rashi's problem is. Rashi's problem is to say what the Taicha Vayigdal here. According to this interpretation, he's not coming to explain a duplicate. Why does it say Vayigdal again? Nor the Pshat Vayigdal Moshe is trying to tell you what is the meaning of Vayigdal Moshe in unser Pasuk in our books. Base number 2. Der Biur of an ersten Posse, and then we don't need to explain the first Vayigdal Hayelet that it means to hide. Is Bechlal extra Ziberik. That's extra. We didn't have a problem with the first Posse. And he should just explain the Meiftu in Zweiten Vayigdal Moshe. The second time when it says Vayigdal Moshe, that it means an appointment, not years, not a time from them posik. From them posik, from our posik. Ados meidli gedula, shemino parabes. That this means greatness, because Pare pointed over his house. Then we would learn that this is a pshat over here. And Gimel, Rashi doesn't even need to tell us that this idea that growth, gadol, doesn't mean necessarily in time, but it means status, that he became an appointment. We already know that in the pasuk. Also, we find this idea that gadol would mean becoming great, not just in age. As the zweiter Vayigdal is benegei chashivas, the gadlus and this idea that the second time that says Vayigdal means importance and greatness. But we can understand it without Rashi's comment. This would be similar to the 2 times Vayigdal were staying free by Yitzchak. They already are stated in the pasuk with regards to Yitzchak. So over there too, it says Vayigdal Hayeled Vayigomal. By Yitzchak, it says the child Yitzchak became big and he was weaned. And then it says, and the man, Yitzchak, went and became great until he was very great. Because the Erster Vayigdal is in Zman. The first Vayigdal is talking about time, Vizas Vayigamal, to the time that he was weaned. And the zweiter Vayigdal, and the second time Vayigdal, means is in moving from Gadlus ben Chosim. That's understood in the context of great in assets. It's very similar. In the Hemshech HaPosuk, the Posuk says, Gadol Me'oid, Posuk Vahiloi Mikne Soin, he acquired sheep, Mikne Batzor, and acquired cattle, Bavuda Rabbo, and lots of work. And Rashi says there, Shoyo Emrim, they would say, Zevel, Preidoisov Shel Yitzchak, better is the Zevel of the predators of the animals of Yitzchak v'loy kaspe v'zohava shel Melech, and not the silver and gold of Avimelech, which means that he was greater. That's a level of concept of greatness, not in a timely way. Same thing is Moshe. So what would be the problem? So we can't say that Rashi is just trying to tell you that Gadol means greatness versus in age. And the Rebbe begins the explanation by saying, when did this happen? The pasuk starts off by Hi Bayomim Ha'im. So this follows the previous pasuk. Says the child grew older, she brings him to Bas Parig. And in those days, so Pashat Vahi Bayomim Ha'im, if it says Vahi Bayomim Horabim Ha'im, that means a lengthy time afterwards. When it just says Bayom Ha'im, it means right then. So it seems like the second story, when he goes out to beat up the Mitzri, was at the age of 24 months. After 24 months, how is that possible? So Rashi has a problem in Vayibi of Mahem. So Rashi is actually trying to tell you that the first one isn't talking at 24 months when she weaned him, but it's talking about Ligdula when he was big, so that Vayibi of Mahem of our pasuk would now fit. That's why he can beat up a mitzvah. Let's look inside. Now, the Birba calls it. The explanation of all this. The pasuk zok Vahi Bayomim Hohem was in those days by Yigdal Moshe. Those days. Because the Baal Doshte Baal Noch pasuk by Yigdal Hayeled Gomer. Since this says it states this immediately after the verse by Yigdal Hayeled, etc. Meintes, so that means as there by Yigdal Moshe, this by Yigdal Moshe is given by Yomim Hohem for free. It was in those days of before. Non Shuzman, this was close to the time from Vayigdal Hayeled, but Pasuk before says the child grew big and she brought Yocheved, brings Moshe to Bas Pareh, and he was to Bas Pareh for a son. Close to that time, by Yomim Hohem, Vayigdal Moshe, that Moshe got big. Kemen, the Rebbe L'chayren is Lemnen, so therefore, this would negate the interpretation by Yigdal means he became important. He's the age of 2 years old, he's not going to become important. L'chayren is Lemnen. At the Pirush Vayigdal Moshe, that the meaning of Moshe's growing up is Gedula B'chashivas, mean that he was great in importance. Because it doesn't really fit to say, as in the Yom Mahem those days in which he became old after 24 months, no detect the days that followed the end of nursing, is Vayigdal Moshe Ligdula. Moshe became big in importance. The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish. That's what Rashi says. The first one was for height, and the second one for Gedula. So, in other words, we're really trying to explain what the Rishon was. Because the Sheni doesn't fit in the Bayom Mahem, so we want to tell you that the Rishon is L'koima. After the Rishon is L'koima, then we say the Sheni is L'gedula. We cannot just tell you that the Sheni is L'gedula. Because if we don't change the pshat in the first one, then it doesn't make sense to say Sheni L'Gedula because it was all in the same time. So Rashi is coming really to tell you that the Rishon is L'Koima. The Iker Chidish in them, the main novelty here is not been again and Vayigdal from unser pasuk. The as it relates Vayigdal, what's in our pasuk? Sheni L'Gedula, that it was for greatness. Not as the Vayigdal from 3 year dikum pasuk made L'Koima. But we're trying to tell you that the previous one means right. Vayigdal Hayeled, basically we're saying what it says, the child got old, made need them gidl was noch zman hayinika. Does not talk about the growth that takes place after the time of nursing, which means when he was after 2 years old, as it appears at the first glance. But Lekoima, we're talking about the first one was height. Then a kind wächst aus wird a Godel. When a child grows up and becomes Godel, by Yigdal, bekommen height kipshute literally. But those is mit Hameshach Yorm, this would be of a stretch of years, after the time that he was weaned. So the pasuk here is not saying that he grew up from weaning, but a long time afterwards. How could we, if we're talking about afterwards, how can we call him a yeled, a child, a yigdal hayeled, if we're talking about after, later on when he's already getting tall, after the age of 11, 12, as Rebbe will mention in a minute. Und das, was wird noch als angerufen yeled, this that we still refer to him as a child, is came to me in it. That is not a surprise. We already find Yosef, who was 17 years old to 18 years old, was referred to in the pasuk as a yeled. As Reuven, find earlier that Reuven had gesagt hayeled einenu, when he went to look for Yosef in the pit, and the brothers had taken him out and sold him to the Ishmaelim. So he says hayeled, the child einenu. Or later on, when he was arguing with his brother, I told him al techtohu bayeled, when they were facing the problems of Mitzrayim. So referring to Yosef, as a yeled, meaning the Yosef was his dan alt given 17 years, and they were referring to Yosef who was 70 years older. Oh, so now that we're saying that this Vayigdal means Lekoimo, so now Al Zarishin Lekoimo. Since the first one Vayigdal means to write, not when he was 2 years old, but it means when he was already older, when he was Lekoimo. Yishoy Farshtandik was Bismichas to the Mizman, then we can understand that close to that time, and that it should Lekoimo, that he already grew in height. Can then we can also already interpret that the Yigdal Moshe means in greatness and importance. So the second one means Gdula. And now this answers why Rashi doesn't just start Hasheni Ligdula, because this is not a duplicate question. Rashi wants to emphasize that this is the problem, is because it says Vayigdal Hayeled, and if it would mean if it would mean that he was only 2 years old, then how could we learn Vayigdal Cheshivas over here? So Rashi has to bring down the question to point out that his main problem is with the previous pasuk, not with the duplication. But it doesn't fit the Vayigdal if Ksiv Vayigdal Hayeled, if it means 12 months old, we have to 24 months old. The meat is like move on. With this, we also understand was Rashi is mefared the shaila, that Rashi details his question. Why he has to say that bottom that Iker Chiddush B'Pirushi is because Rashi's main novelty in his commentary, as mitzad dem was do steht noch einmal Vayigdal Moshe, because it says again Vayigdal Moshe beit sich der Teich from Vayigdal Hayeled in früher the pasuk. When the pasuk now it changed. You know, if it didn't say again Vayigdal Hayeled a second time, we would have learned the first one means after 24 months old when he was weaned. But since it says in our pasuk by Yom Mahim, and he became important, how could that be? So we have to change the pasuk. So that's why Rashi brings down that it's based on mitzadem was doshtek nochamo Vayigdal Moshe. That it already says again Vayigdal Moshe after it says before Vayigdal Moshe. We're changing beitzich der taich Vayigdal Hayeled. We're changing the Taich Vigdal Yella in Friedrich Pasuk in the previous Pasuk. Now, the question is, how could we possibly say that Vayigdal Hayela means after he became tall that she brought him back to Baspare? The only reason that Baspare allowed Yocheved to raise him was because she needed him nursed, so she took care of him while she nursed him, Yocheved. But as soon as she finished nursing, technically she should bring him to the Baspare. So how could we say that she only brought him when he grew big? And the Rebbe said that's not a problem because with all kinds of excuses, for sure, Yocheved was trying to hold on to her own child, which was Moshe Rabbeinu was her child, and therefore that's not a problem. Let's look l'chayre, come and frag. So it would seem maybe you can ask, since she gave him to Yocheved to nurse, only to nurse, and that was the reason. Is test. So how come was the other lost Menzolim bring that she would allow to bring him back? Erst noch dem ausgewachsen became only after he grew in height. Was his canal noch this man which is, I said earlier, many years after the time of nursing. How would she allow this? How could we say that this happened later? Is that's but it's a very simple explanation. The mother, the true mother, Yocheved was the true mother. She had received her child Moshe. She did not return Moshe, her child, to the daughter of Paro as soon as she finished nursing. Sure, she put in effort to help him by Zichus Langer, to hold on to him as long as possible. After she finished nursing. There are she could explain it, and reasoning, various different excuses. That would be accepted on the heart to convince Baspare. And some of it the Rebbe brings down. Since the child is used to her, and he's tied, is nid good mezolim uprising, so it's not good to tear him away. When I take him away from her, there's kinds of reasoning. When he already became tall, became big and tall, so she had no choice. When he gemusst abgeben zu Baspare, she had to give him back to Baspare. So that's okay. It fits with the storyline that Vayigdal, when he got the Koima, because she held on to him until she came. So now the Rebbe explains that still, why did Rashi says that he appointed him? What was the greatness he appointed him on the house of Pari? This is how did Rashi know that what he did? What's the evidence for that? Because the Rebbe explains now that even that we said that he was big, the Koima, Bayomi Mohaim, then he got important. What kind of an importance can you give to even 11 or 12-year-old? And that's why Rashi says he pointed him over his house. So we're not talking about that he made him to a minister or anything, but let's see. We still have to understand. Since Baspare had gewollt haben Moshe Basich, since the other party wanted to have Moshe for herself, he's moving. So it's understood as Yocheved hat ihm gekannt verhalten. How much could she hold on to him? Nor bis wann es kann sein gültig der Tam bei Masla now. Not only for as long that it applies the reason and the excuse that he needs his mother, he can't be torn away. As for Yelad, it's wichtig to bleiben bei der Menekes that by the child, it's important to remain by the one who nursed him, sei dich stark zugebunden, being tied and koruch to him, and following her. It's similar. But those is Bizin Gilfana Ben Chomesh V'Sheish. That would be till the age of around 5 and 6. L'chola Yosef B'Shtadlis Yiseda, and at most, with a lot of effort, you can push him off till bis zum Gil from Yud Aleph Yud Beis Shana to 11, 12 years old. So we can't really logically say to the Pasuk Vayigdal, the Koima, how many years? Maximum, we can say 11, 12 years old. So in that case, even 11, 12, how could you possibly say that immediately following that, so Moshe Nazar Jungun Elter, so Moshe at such a young age took him to Gedula Bachashivas? How could we say that he became great in importance at the age of 11, 12, Asheni Gedula, that the second was Gedula? That far is Rashi Mamshir, that's where Rashi continues. As the Gedula Bastate in them was Minu Pare al Beser. The greatness was that Pare appointed him over his own. Sizni Tachashivas Gedula Klolis in Yone Pare. Look, this is not an importance or some general greatness in Pare's matters, which is Malucha. I'm not talking about him getting involved in the governance of Pare. But Aminui Proti, we're talking about a specific appointment, a private, Dinyoni Bayis from Pare, on the matters of Pare's home. Was Azag Gedula Uminu is such a kind of greatness and appointment. Ken Zain Oich Ba'azavos is noch sehr jung, can also be by someone who is very young. Aib es is do asibem yuchedes in them, if there is a special reason for that. We may gefin by Yosef, as we find by Yosef, as to 17 and 18 Jahr is a schön given a memuna al bais Potiphar. So you see that when he was 17, 18 years old, he was already appointed to the house of Potiphar. So therefore, I guess 11, 12, also to become a appointment and a home, something like that, that's not something surprising. And therefore Rashi has to say, though, what was the importance over here, not a general importance, because still age-wise that wouldn't fit. And the Rebbe will explain no Zion. That's Rashi quotes from the Pasuk Moshe, because why even that young age is Vayigdal Moshe, because we're talking about Moshe who is unique, and therefore he could be appointed even at this young age. Zion, Tam. What is actually the reason was Pariot Manig ben Moshe now basic that Pari appointed Moshe to be in charge over his home in Azai Yungun Gil in such a young age. Is the Rashi Merames Duchmaitik Zayin. Rashi hints the answer by quoting from Pasuk the word Vayigdal Moshe. He brings down Vayigdal Moshe. Und der Mitbavort Rashi noch a Shaila benegei the word, and then Rashi is also, by the way, answering a question with regards to why do we need Bechlal Vayigdal Moshe? We know that it's Moshe Rabbeinu. The Chayre is the word Moshe do in Pasuk Iberik. It seems like the word Moshe. Vayigdal Moshe is extra. If it would have said Vayigdal, we already would know from the previous Pasuk that we're discussing about Moshe. So therefore, we need to say, as the time was the Pasuk is Nomefared and Nomen Moshe, that the reason why the Torah, the verse specifies the name Moshe, is Valdi Hadgosha, that the Torah wants to tell you Moshe Vayigdal Moshe. The emphasis by Sofer Nomedos is Nit Muchra. When the Torah adds a name, you don't have to really say a name. Why would the Torah say a name? It's to emphasize Moshe got me. Weiß Bechlau of an India von Chavivas v'Chashivas that shows the name of dearness and importance. By Yigdal it's Moshe. Ubefrat der Nomen Moshe. The name is Moshe, so we're trying to say Moshe. Important was their mont as Bas Parei min Amayim Mishisiu. When we say the name Moshe, she has drawn him out of the water, and also Nishtarvevo Amoso Amis Harbe Mazeveta, and then that her hand stretched out, all the miracles. Moshe, it's that Moshe, that miraculous child who was saved from the water, who was saved in a way that Nishtarvevo Amoso Harbe Harbe. Thus meant by Yigdal Moshe. And this means Moshe became bring Dosis Agadlus versus Gekumim Mitzad Chavivus. This is a greatness that came because of the special dearness, because of Moshe. So the Moshe's Chavivus and Sias Chain by Bas Parei, because Moshe was so dear, and he found grace by the daughter of Parei. Bisas Vahilo Leben, to the extent that he made her, took her, she became to her for a son. But she gepoiled by Parei, so she influenced Parei, she impacted, convinced Parei, that he pointed him over his home. Now, by Yosef, similar to what we find by Yosef. Why was Yosef appointed? As by Potiphar, since he found favor, grace by Potiphar, Yosef, he appointed Yosef over his home. Nit Kukundik was that he's given a Nar Ivri, notwithstanding that he was a Ivri, a Hebrew Nar, a lad, when an Eved and a slave, and still he pointed him up because he was Noisechain. Because Moshe was Noisechain by the Bas Parei, he pointed him to that level. So that's why it's Moshe, that's what we, plus it says Moshe, that's why Rashi quotes Moshe to give you an understanding why she would appoint him and at this age. And here the Rebbe explains now the name, why Rashi brings down the name of Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Loi, because the Rebbe will bring down that Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Loi was very poor. He actually shared a garment with his wife, and they didn't both go out at the same time because they didn't have the clothes to go outside with one at a time, and that's how poor he was. And yet, we find that he was placed the first one to speak by the Roman government. So you see that even somebody who's very seemingly poor, in this case, Rabbi Loeh, but the same thing is as far as Yosef. He was a young child, and yet can get a very high position as Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loeh did, notwithstanding the fact that his condition. Ches, and in order for this to be more logical, as to leave the Siyas Chain, Gitman Aminu, that because of the grace, he give an appointment to someone who seemingly is not fit. He's only 11, 12 years old, and we're giving him a appointment over the house of Parei. So something to make more sense out of this idea. Befrat, as the Dugma Hanal for Yosef is need doimel in that example that we brought from Yosef is still not Yosef was 17, 18, and here we're talking about 11, 12. Yosef is upon him outgiven 17, 18 years. Over there he was 17, 18 years old. Ashenken Moshe was his bepashtus given nit mer. Simply, he was no more than the Ben Yud Aleph or Yud Beis. He was 11 or 12 kinala said before. So, in order to make this more real, is Rashi Maitik as the Bal Hamayme. That's why Rashi quotes that the author of the statement is Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Loeh, is Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Loeh. Wegen Rabbi Yehuda werd erzählt in Gemara. It is related about Rabbi Yehuda. As is given a größer oni, he was very poor. This, as to the extent he was so poor, as und sein Freu haben gehabt nur ein Beged, that he and his wife only owned one garment. B'shas Reb Shimon ben Gamliel had Geuzer Tainis given. And when Reb Shimon ben Gamliel decreed a fast day, had Rabbi Yehudam had time and it came kuma for that reason that he only had one garment. He could not come because his wife was out. It hobnik in Beged Otston if he didn't have garment to put on himself. So we see the state how poor Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi was, and notwithstanding that, from deswegen yet, when we find as the Keser in der Heuben that the Keser raised him to sein der Reish HaMedabrim b'chol mokim, to be the one who talks first in all places. That was Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi. Biz as Murainu the Bein Nisio Have, he was the leader, as Rashi says over there, that he was the Tosha says. Murainu the Minu Keser Reishal Beis Nasi, that the Keser appointed him to be the head of the house of the Nasi. So what do we see from this Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi? Warum Hagam as Rabbi Yehuda is mitzad sein äußerlichen chitzonisch matzav with neue chayim. Although for his external, outwardly situation and his life condition given in Atzir, he was in such a way was his need massive for a minu from Aroish in the Eigen from Malchus. He's not fit for an appointment to be a head in the eyes of the kingdom. Okay, now, so when you look at it simply, he is not a fitting person to be the head speaker and the appointed ahead, but as given a grace, as I said before, as given a grace of the man, it was very poor. I feel him for glach with Andarani, even in comparison with other poor people. But because of his advantage in finding grace in the eyes of the king, in the Keser gemacht als Reish HaMedabrim. So specifically him, he was appointed to be the head of the Medabrim. Unminohu Keser Reish Beis Nasi, and the Keser appointed him as the head over in the house of the Nasi, so he became on a very important position. Aderech says, move on binyanenu. Similar, it's understood in our case. Afal P, as Moshe is not given young, even though he was young, Anar is over mitzad zayin maila because of his advantage. Zayin dik azoy chavig babas Parai, that he was so dear by Parai's daughter. Was it min hamayim? She had taken him out of the water. By Hilo leben, he was to her for a son. He earned himself importance in the house of Parai. Biz as minu Parai al-Beiser, to the extent that Parai appointed him over his home. So the way the Rebbe explains all this, it's all based on the Bayomi Mahem, Vayigdal Moshe, that the second Vayigdal and the first Vayigdal is in the same period. And therefore we have to say that the first Vayigdal means Bekoima, and therefore the second Vayigdal means B'chashivus. And what kind of a chashivus? It has to be appointment of the house, and even though the reason why he was appointed is because he was Moshe and he was Maspari, and he found favor, and because of the favor that he found, Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi tells us that even though he was in a condition that he was a young child, and still because of the grace, just like Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi being poor, and yet he was the Reish HaMedabrim, likewise Moshe Rabbeinu in this case. Now the Rebbe is going to continue with the Yena Shel Torah about the Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi to tell us also from his father, Hagoyes, the two opinions about the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, the two parts of Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Tachlis Hashlemus in himself, but it was also Tachlis Hashlemus as a Roya, as the Rebbe will continue to explain according to Yena Shel Torah. Oistes. Unyena shel Torah in them Pirush Rashi, the wine of Torah in our Rashi. Alle in Yonim was megifin by Moshe Rabbeinu. All aspects that we find by Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gashmias, physically, Kumen und werden Nishtalshel from the Zelbe in Yonim. They come and they evolve. They're Nishtalshel from the same ideas as they are spiritually. Especially by Moshe Rabbeinu, especially by Moshe Rabbeinu. Was is given lemato, punkt wer is given lemailo. The way he was below, he was just like above. And the Shema de Atzilus, that he was the soul of Atzilus, even as he was down here. So what we find by Moshe Rabbeinu physically when he was born, we see those levels apply also spiritually, whether he was born circumcised or the house was filled with light. Those are a physical manifestation and expression of what he really was. As in the Tzvei Yoni Gedula, also with regards to our matter, that in these two aspects, Vayigdal, the two greatness, and Harishon Lekoima, the first was height, and Masheni Legedula, the second one was for greatness. Shemino Pare Abesa, that Pare appointed him for his home. Zogen sich heraus die Tzvei Yonim in Madrigas Moshe Beruchnis. They express Moshe Rabbeinu's two aspects spiritually. One is Koimo, that's his, we'll see his personal growth shows on his greatness, and one is greatness as he relates to others. But when das Verstehen behagdim was say from Posik, we'll understand it by introducing on the verse. Benegei leads Moshe as far as the birth of Moshe, as it relates to Moshe's birth, it says, Bataro Isha Batelet Bain. So the woman became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Batero Isha Kitoivu. She saw that he was good. Vert gebracht in Zoyar, and the Zoyar is brought down a machloikis, a disagreement between Rabbi Chaim and Rabbi Yossi, between Rabbi Chaim and Rabbi Yossi. What exactly does it mean? Batero Isha Kitoivu. Rabbi Chaim says the Isyalid Mohul, that he was born while circumcised. That means good. Und Rabbi Yossi says, Nihiru de Shechinta de Nohir Bei Chamas. She saw the light, the shine, the light, Nihiru, the light of the Shechin of the divine, the Nohir Bei Chamas. She saw in him that light. The Bishas the Bishaita the Isyalid, at the time that he was born, is Male Kol Beisa. Whole house was full with light. Baldo, and that's why we say Kitoiv who Ksiv. So Kitoiv was good, it was light there. The Kulahava. It was all there, as the Rebbe will say. All it was Mohol, and it was also the level of light of the Shekhinah. Is Mavur in Erecham. Explained in the Sefer Erecham. As the Machloikis for Rabbi Chaim and Rabbi Yossi is not in Metzias, that the Machloikis between Rabbi Chaim and Rabbi Yossi is not a fact, whether he was born circumcised or whether the house was filled and she saw the Shekhinah. Beide halten as by Moshe and given beide in Yonim. They both agree that Moshe had both matters. Noiled Mohul unihira the Shekhinah, that he was born circumcised and it was the shine of the divine. The Machloikis is nor Vosot Yochevet Gizen. The question is, what is it? So what did she see? Madgish given. What was the emphasis? The fact that he was Mohul or the fact that he was, the Shekhinah was there? Why, Farvos halt Rabbi Chia as the Sialid Mohul? Why does Rabbi Chia say his view is that he was born while circumcised? Or Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef holds as Nehira, the Shechinta, the Noir Bechamos. She saw the shine of the Shekhinah that was shining on him. That's what she saw. Is that Tate Mevayir in Zayin HaOris of Zohar. So my father, the Rabbi Yitzchak, explains in his notes on the Zohar. As Yeder Einer is Derish L'Fi, that, each one of them expounds it based on their level. Rabbi Chia was Eris Bechinas Yisoid. Rabbi Chia, who is the level of Yisoid, Doirish Shenolad Mohul. He expounds that Moshe was born Mohul, Shekoi al Rosa de Bris Yisoid. That goes on the secret of the Bris, which is done on the Yisoid, and that's the level of the Yisoid. What Rabbi Yossi is Bechinas Malchus. Yossi is the level of Malchus. He doirish, he darshan the hid of the Shechinta noirbe. He says that the light of the Shekhinah, because Shechinta is Bechinas Malchus, the Shekhinta is the level of Malchus. Reb Chia's level was Yisoid, that's what he says about the Bris. Rabbi Yossi's level was level of Malchus, that's what he says about the Shechinah. The Sim Ha'inyan in Zoyan. So what the Zoyar says in the end, Valdo Kitoivu Ksiv, the Kulhava, and that's what it says Kitoiv, and they were all, is not from Divrei Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi doesn't, Rabbi Yossi says specifically his level. But that is the Zoyar saying, or the Stamma from Zoyar Firtuis. It is just the Zoyar, this nameless Zoyar says, concludes, as is remember in Beit in Yonim Kinal could come that he had both in Yonim, as we'll see later on. But basically, Rabbi Yossi and does not say this second last part of the statement. That's not part of Rabbi Yosef's Sandahida, because he only holds that it was the Shekhinah, and Rabbi Chia only holds that it was Mohol, because Rabbi Chia's level of Yisoid and Rabbi Yosef's level of Malchus, so therefore each one says their level, as the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak explained in the Oris on the Zohar. So Rabbi is going to explain now what this means is Mohol represents his shlemus of himself, and the Shechinta represents his relationship as a leader, as a shepherd. Yud. The Hasbari Noisus Pshuto is to explain this in simple words. The Mailus Umadregas of Moshe gefindt man Svein Yonim. As far as the greatness and the level, the steps of Moshe's greatness, we find two aspects. Zain Milo and Shlemus Benegela Atzmei. His advantage and his wholesomeness as it relates to himself. It is given the Nifchan Mikol Min Ha'odom. He was the most choicest of all of humans. From the type of human, he was the choicest. He was higher totally than the world. He was entirely, all of him was connected and united with godliness. That's a level that describes Moshe Rabbeinu himself, what his status, who he was. Beis. The other advantage is his awesomeness being as a shepherd. He drew down and he gave the flow for all matters, physical and spiritual, to Eden, to the Yid. And then through the Eden to the entire world. But das is bechlal, but das verbunden bechlal mit that is generally tied to the movement von Yerida von seinem Maimid Naila. That's a descent from his standing and his station, the great station, was his hechevot higher than world. His own level is where he's higher than world, and then how he's a shepherd, that relates how he influences the world. These two categories of greatness were open, taken Mishanel as soon as he was born. And with the Medrash sagt im Pasuk, that Moshe was a shepherd. He was prepared to become a shepherd. So a physical shepherd there too, but he was a shepherd by birth. And these are these two above mentioned of the circumcised and the Shekhinah. When we say that he was born circumcised, vice, that points to Zan Egen or Milo Shlemus and his own advantage and wholesomeness. From Welt in a way that is higher from Welt. That's higher than the world is by he was born circumcised. That's not the nitkeseder tava. That's not the regular order of the world, the nature. But he was beyond nature. That means that by him, like the Gilui, the Nefesh Halikis, that by him openly shines the godly soul. Be at ease under Orlo, there is no stuffing, no foreskin. Under Helm for Yetzirah, there is no block of the Yetzirah. It's open, revealed to begin with. That's where he was born. That the level of him was on a higher level, unnatural level. He had right of ways the Nefesh Elikis shining through him without any obscurity. There was no foreskin. Und das was Nehidu de Shechina Norbe, the second part, that there was this Shechina lighting by him, Ismail Kula Beso, that is the Maila V'Shleimus for sein Hashpoah V'Ha'ora to Eden Well. That is his greatness and his wholesomeness in his flow and the way he shined to the Yidden and to the world. Und der River. Therefore, mitzad b'chinas yisoid v'sis b'atzilus. When we talk about the level of yisoid, which is the level of Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yossi, level of Achia. So that's the level of yisoid. Hecher far nivroim, which is higher than created being. Noilad mohu. He says, so then below in the service of Hashem it's in such a way as that Iker Hamaila is Dveikus Veskashrus Belakus, that the main advantage is his cleaving and tying to godliness, Shlemus Atzmai, his own wholesome of himself. Das was means Oizgiton und Hecher from Welt, the fact that one is not on higher than the world, undressed, not caught up in the world. The Rebbe Zokter of Chia, that's why the Chia, whose level of Yisoid says, as the Maila for Moshe was the Torah bring Tarois. So what is the advantage of Moshe that the Torah expresses? Is those was the Sialid Mohel, that Moshe Rabbeinu was born circumcised. Moshe's Milo Shlemus Atzman, Moshe's greatness in his own awesomeness. That's the way Rabbi Chia Yisoid sees Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's what it emphasized, that he was Nolad Mo. It's hard beginnes Malchus over, but from the perspective of Malchus, was Mahav Nivroim Mashpia and Ilmes Bia, which creates created beings and gives the flow into the worlds of Bri Yitzirasiyah. So then it also comes so the service of Hashem as the Iker Milo and Shlemus, that the main advantage and wholesomeness is in Hashpah v'Yiridat Azulas, is by the flow and the descent to somebody else. When the Rebbe Zokt Rabbi Yossi B'chinas Malchus, therefore Rabbi Yossi with level of Malchus, he says, as the Milo from Moshe Notzchong in them, that what was his the thing that was visible in the fact was Nehiru, the Shchinta, Noir Bechulu, Ismali Kulu Besa, that shine by Moshe was filled the whole house, the Ismali Habayis Kulu, the whole house filled with light. Ba'adrabe. And on the contrary, Kishem Vidarinyan is Lamailo. Just as the idea above, the real expression of the Ein Sof, as the Koyach Ein Sof, Shemetzusim Atzmusei, the power of the Ein Sof, whose existence is from himself, Zok Tzucharuiz Davki Sfiras HaMalchus, expresses specifically the Sfira of Malchus, in that his Habas from Yeshu Davar Nifra, in creating an entity as something separate of godliness, that's an expression of the Koyach Atzmus. Von Oilmes Bia, unit in the Sfira Shel Mailman, and not in the Sfira higher than it. Al derech zeh is mata. Similar, it's also below. As the emes of Mailu Pshita Zok Tzuchois Davke in the Rashpon Amshochat Azulas, that the main advantage and the simplicity of the greatness expresses itself in the flow and to give to others. In the revealed way, it looks like a descent and a lowering in one's level. But in truth, over there actually lies the koyach of the atmos at a much higher level. So these are Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi. But the Rebbe wants to bring out from the Rashi now that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Loi, he combines those two things together. That Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Chia know more your own Maila and the Maila of Hashpoah to bring them both together. Das ist Rashi Merames, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi. The first one was for height, the second one was for greatness. Shemino Pari Abese, the Pari appointed him, the Pari appointed him over his own. But Tzad Madreges Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi, from the perspective and the level of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi, the Herzig, the Meile in Beiden Yonim. Then you can sense the advantage in both of matters. Sayin dem Gilu for Shleimus Atzmai Lekoima. Both in the revelation of his own wholesomeness, which is Lekoima, his height, representing Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness of himself, and Sayin the Minyan, also in the aspect of Hashpol Azulas, to influence the other. The Gendula Shemino Pare al Beise, that Pare appointed him to his house. What is that connection to Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda is the Sfiras Amalchus. Openly, the name of Yud Kei Vavki is in him. So in Sfiras Amalchus, we have the way Sfiras Amalchus is in Atzilus and the way Sfiras Amalchus functions Lamata. And therefore, by him, there is both the Milas as they're combined. They're beating them b'pnimis in yonim. To explain this in the inner matter of things. The Chilik Tzvishin Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lo, and Rabbi Yossi. His name is Rabbi Yehuda, and his name is Rabbi Yossi. So before we were discussing from the Lukut Levi Yitzchak and the Rachama that Rabbi Yossi is the level of Malchus. Rabbi Yossi is the level of Malchus, but there's a difference. His Beida is in Yonim and Madregas some Sfiras Malchus. They're both at the level of Malchus because you see the word Rabbi Yossi is Big Matri Elikim. And the name of Elikim, that's the same numerical value of Elikim, which is what 60, what is it? 86. Yeah, Elikim is 86. With a hey, of course, not the Kim spelled here with a kuf, but it's Elikim with a hey, so that's 86. So that means Shem Elikim, gate of Malchus. But the Rabbi Yehuda is also Meloshon Hido Bittel. Yehuda is to admit and subjugation. But this is in Yonah for Sfiras Malchus. So that's also Sfiras Malchus is the level of Bittel, Lesla Mekar Moklum. It's the level of subjugation. So while they're both Sfiras Malchus, but there's a difference because Rabbi Yossi is Malchus going down to Biyah, and Rabbi Yehuda is the way Malchus is in Atzilus. There's a difference between them. Rabbi Yossi is Sfiras Malchus is Yeredes in Biyah. Rabbi Yossi is as Sfiras Malchus as it descends to Biyah. And Rabbi Yehuda is Sfiras Malchus is not in Atzilus, but Rabbi Yehuda is as Malchus is in Atzilus. And was der Chiluk is Oich Merumas in Zeir Nemet. It's also in their names that there's a difference because as we see that Rabbi Yossi Bigmatir Elikim does haste, his numerical value Yossi, as we said before, is Elikim. Does haste as is Nor Shem Elikim or Nit Shem Avaya. So that's only Elikim, not the Shem Avaya. That's one. Which Yehuda has the Shem Avaya in it. In the Gufa Nidvi Elikim Shtei Begilu, also not openly because the name of Elikim is not really in the name of Yossi. It's a gematria. It's a numerical value of Yossi Elikim. Behela Behester, which means that it's hidden and blocked. So Elikim is also, that means that Rabbi Yossi is the lower level. It's in the level of Elikim, not Havaya, and also a gematria. Shenkin Yehuda was in them what state the Yossi from Shem Havaya. Of the Yehuda has the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei in it, and Begilui. So therefore, that's a higher level. And that's we also come to the difference as concerning our matter here. Mitzad Rabbi Yossi, from Rabbi Yossi perspective, in Malchus Kuntarab in Bia. When Malchus descends into Bri Yitzirasya, Herzog on the Meile in Hashpah, Meluch Alam, over there we sense the advantage of the flow and the kingdom over the people. So there is a people there. So Rabbi Yosi just says the Shechina, Ashenke Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Lo, but Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Lo, Rabbi Yehuda, Shema Vaybigilu, Shema Vaybigilu. That's the Malchus steht in Atzilus, says Malchus and Tzilus. It's Adi Darge Herren sich on Beidin Yonim Meile. So then that level senses both aspects of both advantages. Von der einen Seite is Malchus verbunden und mejuchen mit der Shira Shalom Eilman. On one hand, Malchus is tied and connected and united with the spheres that are above Malchus. The Idoch, on the other hand, is Yashedish Shemokar of Hisabas Eilmas. It is the root and the source for the Malchus to go down, creating world that to also come down into separated creations. You see, Achar, using another style, she's done their bittel in Sfiras HaMalchus, that in Malchus there is the level of bittel. So it's bittel in Sfiras Malchus. There is a Melech Lamato, similar by king below, was a Dav Zayin B'tachas HaBittel. Notwithstanding that he's a Sherish Shemokar, he's the king, but he needs to be totally subjugated. By the king, we say that once he's subjugated, when he kneels, he cannot get up because he has to be in a constant bittul. So on one hand, you have the bittul of Sfiras HaMalchus. On the other hand, these Nasus Melech Haolam, he has to be raised over the people. Those are the two steps in the level of Malchus. Malchus bittul and Malchus being raised. That's why he brings out both advantages. Side is Shlemus Atzmei, also his own Shlemus. Lekoimo, the Yichud and Dveikis Medalkus, that unity and that cleaving with godliness. Hechaf and Hovin Stom and Azulus, in a way which is beyond having a connection and doing with somebody else. Harishan Lekoimo, the first one is for his own height. And also the influence and the raising over somebody else. That second step of Gedula, of greatness, that Paray appointed him over his house. And this is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Shmois Tovshin Lamed Vav.